Thank you. Mr Wood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's a real pleasure to speak in this debate, and I congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for Vale of Glamorgan, for securing it at such a really a vital time for so much of the sector. It's a pleasure in particular, obviously, to speak as chair of the all-party Parliamentary Group for Beer and Brewing, the largest all-party group in Parliament, because a lot of public focus is given to the very real harm that can be caused by alcohol and by overconsumption. But not enough attention is given to the very real contributions that British beer and our community pubs pay to almost every element of life. They genuinely are, on balance, forces for good. They're a force for good economically, with beer and pubs contributing about £23 billion to GDP nationally, and as I'm sure the new Chancellor will become very aware, about £13 billion to the Exchequer. They are present in every single one of our constituencies, every part of the country. We have about 1,800 brewers, or possibly more, across the UK, including about 150 in the West Midlands. My own constituency is home to at least five breweries. And these make huge contributions to our local economies. They're a force for good for employment, with beer and pubs employing around 900,000 people, with an almost identical gender balance, and around half of those people employed across the sectors being aged under 25, and with fantastic varieties of career progressions across the industry. They're good for tourism, with British pubs being consistently named as one of the top 3 things that visitors into the United Kingdom want to do whilst they're in Britain. And they're good for exports, being the 3rd highest food and drink export sector, worth around £550 million for the UK economy, and before the pandemic, growing more quickly than almost any other export sector. And they're good for our society and for culture. And at a time where loneliness and isolation are often the biggest challenges facing some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, in many areas, the community pub really is the last of the services in those towns and villages. It is... Of course I'll give way.
Thank my honourable friend for raising both the opportunities, the career, managerial and long-term opportunities in the sector, but also around the charitable and good will and fundraising that happens in many of our pubs. I recently went to a Brave the Shave in the Borough Arms in Haywards Heath, and they were raising masses of money for Macmillan Cancer. And this sort of thing goes on up and down the land, bringing people together and bringing good causes and goodwill together, equally as well as a good time.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and PubAid estimate that pubs up and down the country contribute more than £100 million every year to charitable activities and to community causes, and a further £40 million for grassroots sports in our constituency. So they really are forces for good in our communities. But they have our pubs, our beer, brewing, and as my honourable friends have said, many of our other producers, other parts of the sector, have long been overtaxed. UK pubs and brewers are taxed around 20 times more than US tech companies compared to their turnover. They're taxed around 5 times more than UK gambling. The UK has one of the highest levels of beer duty in Europe, behind I think it's only Finland and Ireland, but 10 times that of Germany. Taken together, our pubs and brewers contribute over 10 billion over 10 billion pounds in tax last year, even in reduced market conditions. 1 in every £3 that's spent in the UK pub does go straight to the Treasury, which I'm sure the Minister will be very grateful for, but I'm sure that members will also recognise the disadvantage that the burden this places on those responsible places for people to drink responsibly and in moderation when compared to the opportunities that particularly supermarkets and other off-trade retailers are able to sell their products far, far cheaper with far less employment costs and far less in terms of their responsibilities to regulate who they're selling to.
On that point.
Of course.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the honourable for giving way. Would he agree with me that it is an absolute travesty that around 10,000 pubs and restaurants could be lost if there are not more fundamental reforms to the tax system that is affecting UK hospitality? Many of them are saying that the pressures they're facing now are even worse than they were during the pandemic. Would he agree with me that we need to go much further than just the alcohol duty reforms?
Well, I think there's obviously been a very long-term trend in moving away from drinking in pubs and on trade towards supermarket sales as shares of the market. Now, some of that will be natural changes in consumer preferences and people's lifestyles, but we shouldn't be allowing the tax system to aggravate those trends where they have such real social and economic consequences. So I think where we can tweak the tax system, make sure that our pubs, our brewers, our other producers are getting a fairer deal, and that this can reduce some of the disincentives to be consuming drinks within well-regulated public houses, then I think we should do so. I do welcome the alcohol duty review. I think it is a massive step forward because, of course, as well as the duty, the level of duty, which, as I've said, is much higher than most comparable countries, all of that is, of course, compounded by not only VAT, but also extremely high levels of business rates. So I do hope that we will be able to look at how our system of local business taxation can be further modified. Clearly, the Treasury have been piloting attempts to charge digital and online companies as a starting point, and I think that's an important starting point. But we do need to make sure that our taxes on clicks are comparable to our taxes on bricks, so that those sectors that are by their very nature have to be, they operate in the real world. Nobody has yet established a viable online virtual pub. I know a few tried during the pandemic. I don't think any of those experiences quite worked out, and I think it's very noticeable that most people come, when was it, April, May last year, were very quick to get back to the real thing rather than the online equivalent. But on the duty review, the reforms that are being proposed are hugely welcome, particularly, I say, the banding that recognises the progression as you go through alcohol strengths, so that higher strength alcoholic drinks pay not quite exponentially more, but certainly progressively more levels of duty compared to low strength drinks. The changes to the low alcohol band for beer from 2.8 to 3.4 will make a big difference in terms of the availability of good quality lower alcohol beer. It is relatively simple for brewers to change recipes to bring down a 3.6, 3.7% real ale down to 3.4 much easier than it is to get it down to under a 2.8 threshold without changing the character of those drinks. Although I do agree with my right honourable friend that 3.5 would clearly be preferable if we're looking at those details. Similarly, on the proposals for small brewers relief, I think that what's being proposed is hugely preferable both to the system we currently have, but also to the initial proposals that the Treasury had brought forward that I think would have caused a lot of difficulties for relatively small breweries. I think these changes, whilst I accept that they take a while to get your head around, and I think that's probably putting it lightly, I think the distorting effect that the current system has with its sharp edges that act as very strong disincentives for growth, that impose an unnatural plateau around 5,000 hectolitres, that mean unless you can be confident that you're going to grow significantly beyond 5,000 hectolitres, you have very little incentive to invest in the extra staff and the extra capital to do so. I think the system that's proposed is far better, and it is very noticeable that what had long been probably the most contentious issue within the beer sector has now actually brought people, whilst there are some details each of them might like to change, the overwhelming majority of the sector now feels this is something that they can live with. And I would suggest that perhaps the Treasury might like to look at whether some form of small producers relief might be possible for wine producers as well, to extend it beyond beer and cider to include small wine producers, which I think would also have a particular benefit for English wine producers. And, of course, Welsh wine producers. And for the SNP bench, I'm sure that I don't know the scale on which Scottish wine producers are operating at the moment, but I would imagine that Scottish producers would probably fall mostly within the smaller category. And finally, on the proposals for the differential rate of beer duty, the draft beer duty rate, and this was a fantastic proposal that the previous Chancellor announced in his budget last autumn. It has the potential to make a big, big difference to supporting responsible drinking within our beers, our pubs, our cafes, our bars, instead of our supermarkets and, let's be honest, our park benches and town centre street corners. The difference it can make will depend on the scale of that differential. The 5p differential is a good start in establishing the principle, getting a new system up and running. It's likely to mean that almost all of that differential is retained within pubs and brewery, which in itself will typically mean around £2,000 additional investment available to pubs. But if we want to see consumers, beer drinkers, benefit from the draft beer duty rate, that differential is going to need to be widened. I think it's only really once you get to the 10-15 pence stage that you start to see a real difference in what customers are paying for a pint at the bar, and that's when it also has the difference in encouraging people to drink in regulated on-premises instead of buying from the off-trade. So we'd obviously like to see that increased. We'd also, if possible, like to see it introduced at the first available opportunity. I know that the Treasury were looking at something being introduced probably in spring of next year. given the difficulties that we all know that the hospitality sector have had over the past 2 years or so, if a suitable fiscal event or financial instrument was to be found that would allow this to come into force before this year's Christmas season, it would make a massive difference in helping the pubs that the Honourable Lady for St Albans was referring to, that may be struggling, may be on the edge of either going under or just about managing to stay afloat through the winter. I think bringing this in early would make a big difference. Now, clearly there's been a very lively debate over container size. 20 litres is very obviously the correct answer. I think from discussions with the previous Chancellor and previous Economic Secretary, I think that they recognise the 20 litres was also where this needed to end up. I very much hope that incoming ministers will now reach the same conclusion. I think actually the previous Chancellor broadly accepted the argument that 40 litres was probably not the right container size for the threshold when he was pictured with the Prime Minister holding 30-litre containers to launch the policy. So 20 litre will make a big difference to the range of particularly our smaller brewers, the types of beer that can be made available, but also I think we need to look at the provisions on distribution mechanisms so that they don't necessarily have to be connectable to either a gravity-pulled or electric-pulled draft system, that the pins of the kind that you see typically in beer festivals in all of our constituencies, where it's just a tap in the side of a barrel, if it's over 20 litres, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I'm talking to some of our brewers. They estimate it's less than 0.1% of their beer is sold through those taps. We're not risking seeing a massive distortion in the market from people buying huge numbers of them for parties at low rates of duty. It is a minimal cost to the Treasury just to make it apply to all containers over 20 litres. Clearly, the system that they've introduced in Australia a few years back that does have a requirement for the connectors, as partly the Australian market is very different. They also have a much, much lower threshold. I think it's as low as 8 litres from memory. But I think 20 litres will capture virtually all of the beer that virtually all of the small brewers that we're trying to support, that supply through our pubs and our licensed premises, they would benefit from this. So I would hope that the Treasury in their final decision will settle on that as the obvious figure. So once again, I thank my right honourable friend. I thank the Treasury for all of the discussions that we've had over the past couple of years, and particularly since the publication of the duty review. And we look forward to these measures being introduced quickly so that our brewers, our publicans and UK hospitality as a whole can benefit, succeed and thrive.
From bench wind up, Richard Thompson.